Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford. I'm a specialist in the Old Norse language currently teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, previously at UCLA, and, as of August 2017, very happy to be returning home to teach at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm back today with another one of my videos in response to a question posed by a Patreon supporter, and in this one I'm answering a question asked by supporter Matthew Colville. Matt asks whether, in a poem like Horbra's the Oath, which I have discussed in a previous video that I'll link at the top right of the screen, where we see two gods in competition, specifically Odin and Thor, debating their various merits and each other's flaws, whether we're looking at maybe two different layers of Norse myth or Norse culture, whether perhaps Thor represents a sort of newer stage of Norse myth than the older beliefs in Odin. In fact, it may be the other way around. There's a fair amount of evidence that the belief in Odin spread sort of late in the Norse world. If you look at place names, which are a really interesting source of evidence for pre-Christian belief, Thor place names are very widespread throughout Scandinavia. You find places named for Thor all over Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. But places named for Odin cluster very strongly in the south, in Denmark and in parts of Norway and Sweden that are closest to Denmark. It's also noticeable that the cult of Odin, involving also the afterlife in Valhalla, seems to be especially mentioned during the Viking Age, and we don't see a whole lot in the in say England and Germany that suggests that Odin was particularly important either. I mean, Odin was certainly there. He's present in place names. He's present in the very limited amount of pre-Christian remnants of poetry that we have in England and Germany, but Thor seems by far to be more important. Thor also is the one who is given Thursday, which of course in the Latin or Romance languages is the day of Jupiter, the prime god. So it's actually quite possible that Thor once held a higher position and that Odin has kind of usurped it. The afterlife in Valhalla also seems to be a sort of late development. It is notable that in a very early poem in the Poetic Edda, the poem Atlakvida, which discusses the death of Attila or Atli at the hands of his wife Gudrun, mentions Valhalla as just a guy's hall. So it seems that when this poem was composed, perhaps in the 800s, the afterlife of Valhalla was not yet a present belief. So, yes, I do think that Horbra's Oath may represent an earlier and a later stage of myth, maybe kind of an older and younger layer in the culture, but I think that Odin is actually the younger one. Thor is the favorite of a more traditional, more conservative way of life in the Germanic-speaking world. The settlers in Iceland were mostly Thor's men, to judge by their names, by the temples they built, and by the names they gave to the places they settled. Whereas Odin, as a god much more associated with the very mobile Viking culture, as well as with the higher class of kings and nobles in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, would have been associated with the enemies they were fleeing in Norway. They were fleeing the consolidation of power by King Harald Fairhair back in Norway. Matt also mentions as a possible as possible evidence for different layers of time in Norse myth, the myth of Ymir and Odin usurping his place and killing him and making the earth out of him. Whether perhaps the Ymir and the giants represent some kind of earlier stage. That's possible too. Of course, it's very difficult for us to look that far back into the past. Many different Indo-European belief systems do involve some kind of competitor species or family to the gods. The Greek gods have the Titans. In early Iranian religion and Zoroastrianism, the Ahuras, whose name is cognate with the Asir, have a demon species they compete with, or demon family they compete with. So this is a pretty early idea, this sort of competing families, good and bad notion. It's possible that the Asir and the Vanir, the two different families of Norse gods, do trace back to maybe an Indo-European family of gods from the invading Indo-European people who came into Scandinavia with the battle axe culture, and perhaps a pre-Indo-European people who might have worshipped the Vanir. It's interesting to note that the Aesir and their warlike rules are a little bit easier to analogize to gods of other Indo-European pantheons and to find cognates to names of in other Indo-European languages. But it's very, very difficult to tell. But surely the pre-Christian Norse religion changed over time, and what we're looking at today is a cross-section not of one layer, but a cross-section that embraces several different layers of time. And so we have to remember that there's not one single Norse religion that was valid for the entire time that the Viking Age and subsequent centuries were going on. Well, thank you again for your time and for your interest and questions. And from the wilderness of the American West, I'm wishing you all the best.